I go out at night and race my heart. I go out at night and leave my head on the bed. Starry, starry night. This is how I wanna live. Gonna lay me down in love. I got so much more to give.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Small Biz Real Talk. We are so excited that you're joining us here today. If this is the first time joining us here live on Facebook, important to remember that we are here to support small businesses, and we like to hear the ins and the outs and the ups and the downs. And we're here today with Mike Tipton with Integrity Communication Solutions. We're so excited to see you here today. We have lots of questions to ask you. We're doing it a little different this time. A lot of times when we meet with businesses, we meet kind of sales facing in a lot of ways, a lot of retail, a lot of restaurants. And so this time it's going to be a little bit different. So join us today. We're super excited to chat with you. ABC Bank sponsors this event, so we're thrilled to be here. So before I get started though, typically we ask you kind of what's the 30-second, pitch of your business later on. But I think since this is a little bit of a nuanced business, maybe talk to us a little bit about, give us your 30-second, give us kind of the background of Integrity.
So Integrity Communication Solutions, we started about 13 years ago, a little bit over 13 years ago. We are a Department of Defense contractor working in diversifying into commercial, but we do a lot of military satellites, so a lot of space-based work. So we do heavy with Department of Defense, heavy with communications, and so it is very different than perhaps going down local retail, but we are local Colorado Springs, and it's a passion of mine. It's a passion of my teams, and it's very unique, but it also gives us an opportunity, not only as a small business, but to get back at a national level. There are a lot of things going on in the world today at a global level, and I would say 2/3 of my company is heavily involved in the communications planning and architecture for that. So I realized that wasn't necessarily the spiel you were looking for, but from a company perspective, we're a small business communications solutions based company.
Wonderful. And so tell us your story, how you got to where you're at right now.
It's a good story. I could have never planned it myself. So I grew up in small town Oklahoma. It was a little town called Hugo. Graduated from a high school called Fort Townsend High School, and I was one of 32 seniors. And I was always told, well, you're from small town, you won't ever really amount to much here. And I went into the military, and I ended up in the world of submarines. And so I was a submarine radioman, submarine communications. So I started underneath the ocean and ended up in space. So, and a lot of that had to do with the intrigue of communicating long distances. Realistically, when you go in the military, you pick your job and you kind of go down a path. And I had no idea what a radioman was. I had no idea what communicating on board a submarine was, coming to periscope depth and all of that intense communication set. And I realized that I really had an affinity for it, really liked it. And so fast forward, I did about 9 years in, and I'd only planned to do 4 years in because I believe I owed my country that. And I had the fortunate opportunity just before I got out in the military to manage a constellation, a protected MILSATCOM constellation. So if you remember Reagan's Star Wars days, MILSTAR was one of the satellites that was a byproduct of that. And I had the fortunate opportunity for the United States and the Atlantic Ocean. I got to manage what was called the MILSTAR, the FleetSat EHF package. There are such things as UFOs. It was a UHF follow-on satellite constellation, and the interim polar system, so polar communications. And so I went from using the system to managing the system. Well, the only thing I hadn't done was fly and operate the system, which is done at the 4th Space Operations Squadron out at Schriever Air Force Base. So in 2001, in September, just before September 11th, I ended up out at Schriever and had the opportunity, just doing some contract work, to really learn the command and control side, which had kind of a global reach to our nation's warfighters. And the whole time, I've always really had an affinity for kind of doing things my way. And even though in the government that doesn't really work, but so I had a really fortunate opportunity. I had some really interesting experiences during 9/11. I had some interesting experiences during Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom when those mission operations kicked off. And I really just grew to want to be able to help the warfighters. and be able to help communications in general. So it was very niched, very protected at the time. It was what was called protected MIL-SATCOM. And the reason it's called protected is it's designed to operate through nuclear war. Well, as time goes on, you look at this and say, you know, I see how business runs. I think I can do this my way, maybe perhaps a little better. And you go take the opportunity. And so that's what I did. So in 2009, I decided to resign from my current position. And I didn't know what I was going to do, actually. I was a little frustrated with where the industry was. I almost left the industry all the way around. And I finally was asked, well, if you know how to do this, why don't you go do your own thing? And so I did. And I did it as hard as you possibly can. I had no idea that anything like the SBDC existed. I had no idea the SBA existed. I didn't know there were people out there that could help you. I wish I had known all of these things before. However, I did learn roughly in 2015 what the SBA had to offer, and in particular, Mr. Ron O'Haron working with the veterans. And so that really helped kind of branch me out and take me down the path of starting. And I had a couple of business partners that helped in the process, and we worked together. And realistically, it was that initial affinity for that particular communications. Going to a higher level, I'm a firm believer that the number one problem in humanity is communications. And I have a vision to solve that. And when I say that, I mean from all levels: physiological, psychological, technological, all of those aspects of it. And so as I work down a path of building a business, that's kind of my vision. It's a bigger vision, but there are small steps to get there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I think it's so interesting when you talk about communications, because I think that's true across the board. Like you said, you know, that's not just a business thing, that's a humanity thing. And
Yes.
so you can solve that in space, you can solve that wherever you go, right?
Yes.
And so 2015 is when you started Integrity. Is
So
that correct?
actually 2009 is when I started
Okay.
Integrity. 2015 is when I learned how to run a business.
Got it. That's fair. That's fair. And so what made you shift that in 2015, or what made you say I need to start this business?
Yeah. So at the time, so when we started the business, we totally bootstrapped the business. I've never had a loan. I've never taken a line of credit. I don't have investors. Me and a couple of guys put a few dollars in, about $50,000 to be exact, to start the business. And we got our first job. And I realized when I started the business that I had started a company. And the question is did I create myself a job? Was I a solopreneur? Or was I an entrepreneur? Was I going down this path of a entrepreneur, a serial, or whatever the case may be? Was I just going to do this for myself, which is perfectly okay, but I wasn't okay with that. I saw this vision, and I knew that by bringing a team of people in, I could do better. And so had our first contract. There was 3 of us working, and we hired our first person about a month in. And I realized that we needed infrastructure. We needed all these things that I didn't understand about running a business. And so we did a competitive contract. We teamed with a company that has helped us out. And what ended up happening is you realize that at some point you have to build infrastructure. Okay, well, what does that mean? I don't know anything about this. I can do my work very well. And so I was actually working in the business up until about 2015. And I realized, I knew I could do technically the satellite payload troubleshooting, user communications. And I didn't know if I could do this thing called executive management. And realistically, am I the right person as an entrepreneur? Am I really an entrepreneur? Number one, yeah, I started a business, but that doesn't mean that I have what it takes. And so I started doing the research. I started looking for what does it take to be an entrepreneur? And am I the right guy, or should I bring somebody in? And so in looking for that, I realized that I was the one with my business partners that really had the vision for it. So the scariest moment probably in my career was stepping away from binary hexadecimal ones and zeros and walking into business management and saying, I knew I could succeed at that, but the minute I walked away from it, I knew my knowledge was aging and I didn't know if I would be successful on this side. So in 2015, in July of 2015, is when I stopped being technical and I started this other side of things. And that decision point came when I said, am I going to grow the business or am I just going to have a job? And so we chose to grow the business from that point.
So what were your next steps? Like you said, you contacted the SBA. Kind of give us some of those practical tools.
Yeah. So the next steps was, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I went from having a job to trying to figure out what my job is now. And so I said, okay, well, what is a business? Well, the way I understood satellite communications was you typically have your doctrine and your documentation that builds the satellite. You have your network planning and architectures. You have your people who are doing operations. Businesses are the same way. You have rules and regulations. You have people who understand them, people who don't, and you have your go-to folks, and you try to build the technical piece to get your operations of the company up and running. And so in the midst of all of this, I found this really cool place called the SBA and the SBDC. And that was the first time I met Ron O'Haron. And I walked in and love him to death. I walked in and I sat down with Ron, and Ron says, Michael, what are you doing here? And he said, you've been in business for, I don't know, 5-6 years now. Why do you need my help? And I said, because I don't know what I don't know. And so Ron, he laughed at me. And so we started talking, and he eventually, the SBA and Ron in particular recommended me to go to the Emerging Leaders course in small business, where over a 9-month period, I had the opportunity to isolate the finances, the HR, the sales and marketing, all of the things that are business-esque that I had no idea about. And when I started to have an idea about them, I got more concerned. I'm like, well, I don't know these things. How do you move forward? And so, that migration kind of took me down the path. And that's why when I said I need to grow, okay, how do you grow? I'd never written a business proposal. I'd never, any of those things. We just went and got work, and then we started growing the business. And so realistically, that particular instance gave me the architecture and understanding of the back infrastructure that I needed to continue to grow.
Was there anything that was surprising during this process for you?
Every day was surprising. So
maybe from a business who's like you, something that was like an aha moment for you.
Single aha moment. There is no magic sauce. That was the aha moment for me. So what I would do, and one of my business partners used to hate it when I would say, I'm looking for the magic sauce. I'm looking for, I know all these businesses out there are successful. What's that one magic formula? But in looking for the magic sauce, the magic formula, you do the work and you figure out the numbers and you figure out what numbers you need to look at. And you look at all of these things. And that aha moment is there is no single solution and no business is the same. And because all businesses run the same, but are very different and they're not the same, you have to figure out, how do I apply the things that are right to me? And how do I set the infrastructure up and the architecture up that supports what in the world I'm doing? I mean, I came from submarines to operating in the world of space in the middle of Colorado Springs. What doesn't make sense? And so that aha moment for me is that, you know what? People get to where they get to because they work hard. There is no quick track. All these overnight successes typically have been around 10, 15 years, and they've been working and they've been running, and you run before the sun comes up and you run till the sun goes down, and you run on the weekends, and there's no hour set, and you're, especially when you're running global operations, you're all hours of the day, all hours of night. And so that aha moment for me was there is no single solution that says check this box and your business runs well.
So you meet with Ron and he recommends probably a myriad of things.
He did.
And so when did you kind of start feeling the traction start happening?
you grab, you have traction, then you slip a bit. You have traction, you slip a bit. The traction from me realistically started coming when I started understanding the components of the business, and then really realizing what was applicable to me. I remember going through the sales and marketing side of things in the Emerging Leaders course, and I remember thinking none of that applies because I'm in a Department of Defense. It's not like I go out and advertise, "Hey, would you like to buy nuclear war today?" No, so I don't do that. And so the question is, does it really apply? Well, the answer is yes, it does. And so you start figuring out, okay, as I work through this myriad of operations, there's no roadmap that tells me how to go out and get contracts from the government. And I realized that there was a plethora of resources from people in the same industry who are willing to help. Many, many business owners are willing to help. And when I wasn't afraid to ask the questions, that's when traction started being applied. I'll be honest, we've been very fortunate. I've been very blessed. I think the good Lord has a big sense of humor. I wouldn't be here today. But from day one, I had businesses who wanted to work with me. And so getting that start and then working through and having a financial cash flow and trying to build that bank and that cash base up so that you can pay your employees. That was a start of the traction for us. But realistically, understanding how do you write a proposal? How do you work in the industry? That helps with traction. And then realistically looking at the professionals in the industry. It's one thing for me to come in and be HR or be finance or be everything to the company. Okay, that's great. It's not sustainable and it's not awesome because I'm not good at any of those. So you need to go get the professionals to help out. And so when I started realizing that, like the traction started when I walked in and talked with Ron, and he pointed me in the right direction saying, "Hey, go see this person about this thing." And that's when you really started taking off.
We'll talk a little bit about sales and marketing and kind of how that's applicable to your business. I do feel like there's a lot of legal aspects to your business. So where with some businesses, maybe not as much. Mm-hmm. With yours, it feels like that's probably going to be, that's something you probably talk about a lot more than sales and marketing, right?
Yes. True.
Yes.
True. On the sales and marketing side, one of the things that you need as a Department of Defense contractor is everybody wants to Google you. So you need a footprint, some sort of electronic media footprint. The balancing act is in our industry, you don't want too big of a footprint. So there are many things that I don't advertise on my website about what we do, because if you don't need unnecessary attention in certain areas, which is contrary to many sales and marketing. Most of the time, if you're selling something, you want to say, "Well, here I am." Well, here, what you want from a business perspective is you want a footprint big enough for when you apply your proposals to the government, that they can go see that, number one, you're a legitimate business. And number two, you have some sort of track record, some sort of history. And you're saying something on your website about what you're proposing. Because if you're not saying anything on your website about what you're proposing, it doesn't make any sense. So that is at least on my services side. Now, in 2016, I started a product side of the business. So we started doing hardware, software design, and I sold my first product to the U.S. Army, and it was really designed for wildland firefighting. And it was really designed for frontline firefighters to be able to communicate back with incident command. And it's because I had gotten myself into a volunteer firefighter role, and I ended up as an assistant chief while I was running two companies, and just don't do that. And it was a great opportunity for me, but sales and marketing is more applicable definitely on the product side than the services side. But the legal aspects, it becomes interesting. So let me start with what you can kind of call a little bit legal, but so the company holds a facility clearance, so security clearance. How do you do that? There was no roadmap for that. So you call a lot of people, you stay up till 3 a.m. and you research, how do I have the opportunity to hold the credentials that I need to hold? So I learned that piece of it. And then when I first started the business, I can do this myself. I don't need anybody's help. for the record, as a business owner to any other businesses starting, go get legal help, because you're going to end up doing it anyway. And
We hear that all the time.
yes, go get legal help. So I started the business. I did the LLC initially, and then I converted it to a C Corp, and that ended up costing me money that I never needed to spend in the first place because I didn't understand what I was doing on the website, but stood one up. Hey, lo and behold, there's a business. Now what? Now you go talk to an attorney and you get all the documentation that you need. And so we did. We ended up love Sparks Wilson. They've helped me out quite a bit. And at the time, we got yelled at by the attorney. She said, "Don't ever do that again." And it was fantastic, and she wasn't wrong. And so we've gotten a lot of help on the legal side, and then to include on the patenting process. So we've got a couple of patents pending for something called radio direction finding. It's an interferometry algorithm. We've got a couple of patents pending on our neural network radar system that we've designed. And so the legal piece of it, and let me tell you, I look for a lot of patent lawyers, and you can go do your own patent for $300 if you have all the time in the world. Otherwise, you need to find a good legal team that has a very good scientist or engineer that can help you through the patent process. So you don't have to write, you write the outline, and then they help you assemble it. And so, everything from, company structure, setup, looking at contracts, looking at non-disclosures with other businesses, to patenting has been what we've needed help with on the legal side.
And is that an ongoing conversation you have with? Yes. So,
Yes, ma'am.
and is that a team of people, or is it kind of different facets?
So I have different attorneys for my patenting, and it is a team of attorneys that help on the patenting side. And then I have a different set of attorneys for my HR and for and they're local for HR and for my business construct side. So, and you need counsel that can help you in the right areas with exactly what you need. Don't try to go get a generalist that says, "Yeah, okay, I can do it all," because you'll end up spending twice as much money. You'll end up spending more money there. So, and most of the time I've seen the folks are extremely professional. I haven't seen anybody who's tried to sell themselves as, "I can do that." But I have seen most attorneys point me in the right direction saying, "You know what? I know what you need. I'm not the right person, but I know somebody." And the word of mouth is phenomenal, at least from my perspective.
And this industry is fascinating, and there's lots of facets. So who else does this? Is this tell me about your competition?
Yeah.
Is there competition?
Yes, there's a ton of competition, especially in this town. And from a Space Force, a lot of our contracts are U.S. Space Force related. So we've got contracts out at Schriever, at Peterson. We've got contracts at Fort Gordon, Georgia, doing Army training. We have contracts up in Prospect Harbor, Maine, flying satellites. We have contracts across the street, working with local contractors who could be competitors, but a lot of times in industry, you don't try to do it alone. There are very niched contract efforts. Now, our unique attribute is that we are really heavy protected MIL-SATCOM. We are communications overall, so there are multiple frequency spectrums that we operate in, but protected MIL-SATCOM is a science in and of itself. And so there are very few people who can do that well. There are many people who say they can do that, but very few people who do it well. So there are competitors that come in that have a small, shallow layer of ability. And then there are competitors that come in that have depth. And you realistically look at them and say, do I want to team with them, or do they have the same business ethics that I have? Do they have the same approach, same vision? But in this particular area, you've got tons of large businesses, tons of medium-sized businesses, and tons of small businesses that are competitors. And, from my perspective, the Department of Defense has a lot of, in general, government contracts have a lot of differing certifications and set-asides. There's woman-owned small business, economically disadvantaged. There's 8A, there's veteran-owned small business, service-disabled veteran-owned small business. I am none of those. I am a small business. Technically, we're veteran-owned, but there is no set-aside criteria in the Department of Defense, but only through VA. And so as you work your way through the myriad of potential contract ability, you try to figure out, well, what do I have to offer? And from an integrity standpoint, integrity communications standpoint, we have to offer our technical skills. There's no, other than the fact that we're a small business, there's really no set aside criteria for us. So it can be a battle, and we end up becoming the minority in the competition business, where you really have to be top of your game to be able to convince contracting that you have what it takes.
And I'm sure it's a very long process in a lot of ways. But maybe give us maybe a brief overview of what getting a contract looks like.
So, okay, so let's look at this in two facets. One is, are you going to be the prime contractor or not? Or are you going to be a subcontractor support or not? No matter what you choose to do, you need to watch it. Typically, government contracts are roughly 5 years, 5-year cycles. 2 years out, you need to be watching the contract cycles. You need to start when the government starts looking at their acquisition strategy. What approach are they going to go out and what are they going to do? How are they going to market it? I recently had an opportunity, which is very frustrating, where we had top marks on our report card, for lack of better terms. We've done the contract for a long time, but the government removed our ability to compete on it because they put it, what I would like to tell you is they took the lazy person's way out. And I say that because it's frustrating when your customer's happy with you, when you've done the best you can do and there's nothing more you can do, and they just happen to move the contract to what they call an umbrella. And so they've awarded it to only like 6 different people, and there's no technical solution. And so the reason that they took that path is because they're short on personnel. I understand it, but it's frustrating nonetheless. So you watch on a contract cycle. You say, okay, 2 years out, I need to make sure I'm paying attention to all of the potential efforts. If I'm going to go after a brand new contract, I need to start talking with the contracting officers. So you may have to invest in. So my marketing investment is realistically traveling to the site, talking with contracting, talking with technical representatives, understanding their needs, and then sizing myself up and saying, can I do this? Or do I need to team with somebody? And if I can do this and I don't need to team with somebody, that's one thing. And most of the time, you're better off if you team because you don't have all the skill sets needed. As you get close, they send out what's called a sources sought, and they want to see who's going to respond to this particular ad, for lack of better terms. You write. So we do tons of writing. So you write a sources sought response and you say, I'm capable. They will go through and grade. You never hear from them as to whether or not that's not true. Sometimes they'll respond to you, but most of the time they send a sources sought, you respond, you hear nothing. The next thing is you'll see a draft request for proposal come out. So typically 30 days, between 6 months and 30 days before they drop the request for proposal, a draft comes out. They want you to comment on it. And then once you provide your comments in return, 30 days later, they'll take all the comments in, they'll drop the request for proposal, and then you have 30 days to respond. And then most of the time you don't hear a single word for about 6 months. And then they all of a sudden issue an award. And so what's interesting about DoD contracts is, unlike commercial industry, where the closer you get to executing, the more you talk to the contractor, the closer you get to executing, the less you talk to, and as a matter of fact, no communications with the government. And so it's a challenge. So anyway, hopefully that answered some of the question.
No, it definitely did. And Jackie's going to come over and talk to us a little bit about some of the financials and what
Sure.
that looks like. But before she does that, as she comes over, is there anything that you'd like to give advice to a business about government contracting, maybe a best practice?
Really do your homework. Make sure that, remember this. I don't care if they're government or not. I don't care what rules and regulations are in place. People buy from people. So don't waste money and time throwing mud at the wall. I've done that. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that when you're going to perform on a contract, or you're going to go after a contract, that you don't just put your name in the hat, but you realistically have that personal connection. Because I actually had an event one time where we were perfectly qualified for, and I finally got the contracting officer to tell me, Mike, we just didn't know you. And I said, you know what? I respect that. Totally respect that. So just because there are all these rules and regulations in place, make sure that if you're going to go after something, you put your time, you put your money, you put your effort into it. Don't just throw your name in the hat with a big written proposal, spend a bunch of money on the proposal effort to make that happen, and have never even talked to the customer. So people make big mistakes doing that, and they lose a lot of money in marketing doing that.
Yep, I can see that.
Yep.
All right, Jackie, we'll have you come.
Hello.
Good morning, Jackie. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am well, thank you, ma'am.
So this is my favorite part.
The numbers.
Yeah, the numbers. I think it's interesting that you said that you haven't done any kind of financing. I work with some contractors, and like you were talking about, it takes forever to get paid.
It does.
So how do you deal with that? That time gap between having to pay your employees and your rent and your utilities and actually collecting on your contracts?
It's a really, really good question. So my philosophy when we started the business, as long as you make one more dollar than you spend, you don't have to call yourself a hobby. I will tell you, we've been in some moments, but bottom line, I deal with it by keeping cash on hand. So the one thing I've learned in business is no matter what you do, you can have $1 billion worth of contracts. If you don't have the cash to pay your employees, you're not in business. And so there are fortunate capabilities to be able to go out and reach out, but we've never done that because we've kept the appropriate amount of cash on hand to carry us. It took me a year to get paid from the Department of Transportation once. And that was because they had some contractual back end issues as they worked through them that they didn't even know. I was just some small person that had done something. And so to your point, most of the have a net 45, a net 60 contract payout period. But realistically, what you want to do is you want to diversify your contract sets so that you have a constant cash flow as best you can. And it is hard. We've managed to do it over the past 13 and a half years. But I'm grateful for the financial institutions that are out there. I do know that if we needed it, we could go do it. But my objective has been not to do that. The flip side is sometimes you go slower. So our growth has been very slow, very methodical, because that's been our vision, was to keep the cash on hand that we needed to move forward. Now, on the product development side, when we started down the product development path, everything we've done has been internal funding for our internal research and development, truly. And it's a vision that we have. And we've basically taken most of our profits and dumped them back into the company for our investment because of what we see on the vision side. But that's realistically how we've done it.
So what's one of the, or maybe a few of the kind of surprising things that you've learned on the financial side that maybe you weren't expecting when you started the business?
So many things, mostly that many aspects. So let me start here. A lot of times, especially as we bootstrapped it, we tried to do everything internally. And we thought we're going to save ourselves some money. What I will tell you is trying to do a proposal internally costs you twice as much as it does going external. And this is why. When you have people that, as you're growing and you don't have the money to have a full infrastructure, you end up pulling somebody off a billable contract to help them do a non-billable proposal that's a shot in the dark. And I say shot in the dark, that's not true. It shouldn't be a shot in the dark, but you don't know. There's nothing. And so you end up spending twice the amount of money to do that. So that's why I said the professionals are very helpful. Now, we still do all of our proposals internally, but I still write a lot of them, and I'm trying to get away from that. But you can only do that. What I realized is there's about a 5-to-1 ratio. I need 5 billable employees to about 1 overhead employee. And that is roughly the ratio that's needed to support the overhead infrastructure build. And so that probably, to me, when I went back and analyzed it, and I run very tight analytics on my key performance indicators for the company. And I can tell you when hunting season is because of all the vacations. I can tell you summertime vacations. I can tell you our first quarter and fourth quarter finance drops because of Christmas parties and Christmas vacations and Thanksgiving. And those are good things for the team. But on a finance side, I have to spread that across the spectrum. So just because I have the cash today, that's got to,
Right.
so those things that I've learned over the years are vitally important to pay close attention to. And the other aspect is you will shoot your foot off if you think the cash you have in your account is available for you to spend.
Right.
So anyway, those are a couple of the epiphanies that I've had.
So walk us through, out of every $100 that you make, walk us through what your overhead looks like and kind of what you end up with.
So I would say out of every $100 we make, roughly 55% of that goes to paying payroll. I would say roughly 30, maybe 35% of that goes to dealing with overhead and things like being competitive on insurances and on 401k distributions and on PTO and all of the rate structure buildup, the fringe and G&A that works. That's part of our rate wrap buildup. I would say that everything, the rest of it goes to taxes. Taxes are ridiculous on the small business side. So I guarantee you, if I could take the money that we had in taxes and I could probably double my payroll, but that's a whole nother story. In the Department of Defense industry, there's a typical regulations with what you can make profitability wise. So most of the time people come in and say, you can make so much money in DOD. There's a cap in DOD and federal acquisition regulations, and the cap on a operations contract about 10% profitability, of which that's where your competition comes into play. So now I know I can't hit all of my market at 10%. So I'm roughly between 3 and 6% on profitability in an individual contract. Well, why do you do it? Because I love to do it. And so you try to figure out how do you make up the differences. And so that breakout realistically comes from infrastructure costs on in the overhead, and those are our wrap rate sets. And then there's a small finite set where you try to hand out bonuses, or you try to make sure that you can do things like summer picnics or Christmas parties to kind of keep the cohesiveness going. So just need to make $1.
Well, I'm sure it's a competitive, especially in our town, it's a competitive market for employees, for you to be able to find employees and kind of balance that. How much do you pay them and whether it's worth it to keep them if they get another offer. I'm sure that's a very difficult thing.
So I'll tell you this, so there are many aspects on the employee piece that becomes very difficult. One is most employees who've never run a business don't understand what it takes on a government contract. And right now, when you have awesome inflation, people don't understand why they don't have raises commensurate with inflation. It's not possible. And the reason it's not possible is because when I negotiated a contract 4 years ago, I negotiated a rate. Typically, escalation rates are between 1.2% and, if you're lucky, 4%. So it's been standard cost of living on the inflation side. So right now, people, and you're going to see this, but right now, people have to get really creative with how they manage. And I'll be honest, the COVID pandemic and everyone working from home, I don't have opportunities at my company for people to work from home. We do classified work. Right. And so people don't understand that. So the work industry and the workforce has been drastically hurt. And there's been a mentality set that's been drastically hurt as a result of that. And we struggled to bring people on because they don't want to go to work.
Right.
And so that's very unique. And there's nothing I can do about it until the DoD starts allowing classified, home type stuff.
Yeah.
There's not a lot we can do about it. I've got what I've got, and I've got to work within those boundaries.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So how have you, and I know you talked about this a little bit, but what are some of the things that you've done to tweak your financials to make yourself more profitable?
So pay real close attention to overhead. I've had to go through in the past year and a half a right sizing on overhead to employee ratio to IRAD development. So we've paid really close attention to who we have doing what. We try to make sure that we increase our opportunities. And so one of the ways realistically is talking to employees in the company and saying, hey, what opportunities do you see? If we can increase our top line, we can basically spread out the pain, and then we can collectively be competitive. Let me say it that way. So bringing on new business, looking at new opportunities, diversification. So yes, I'm very niched in Protective MilSatCom, but part of the reason for diversification is because I started this company in 2009 at the height of the recession. I understand what it takes to run lean, and we're back there. We're back there running lean, which is why I'm writing proposals. But one of the things that I've also done to help that is if I can consultants in some areas, I can consult in, let's say printed circuit board rule layout, then I can take what would be a full-time and I can take those dollars and divide it up amongst the team to at least try to, make sure that people are compensated well and trying to move forward on the company side. Blue ocean, trying to find things that don't exist. How do I go do this new level of innovation? And you think, well, you're in the Department of Defense. They want you to go fly satellites. What's innovative about that? One of the things that I learned the first time we won our contract effort out at Schriever was before we got to the table, we were hungry. We wanted to get to the table. How do you not lose that hunger? So we've went through, I've done the Measure What Matters book. We're trying to implement objectives and key results. So instead of going to an annual evaluation period, we're trying to go to quarterly sets, quarterly bonuses. They do two things. They spread out the costs that would all be lumped up at the fourth quarter. They spread it out over the year, but they also give people a set expectations on the bonus side. And, I try to be very giving in those areas because it is important. And so those are some of the innovation sets. And I don't know if I answered your question well, but those are some of the innovation sets we're trying.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Mhm.
I think that's a good suggestion for a lot of business owners because it keeps your employees engaged.
It does.
And with everything going on right now, that's really important.
It is. And I'm very grateful for the team that we have and the engagement that they do and what they really help. But a lot of it is purpose too. So why are you here? Why do you come to work?
Right.
And so balancing act, but finances is a big part of it.
So do you use software for your finances?
I do. We use QuickBooks so on my finance side, I use McNew Associates here locally, DCAA auditors, because we have a level of accounting that not all businesses have for DoD. I have a CPA that does accounting, and I have an internal finance guy. So I have three aspects of money management. So you can track a receipt that comes in all the way to the penny through the company. That's a requirement on our side. So it's an additional cost, but it's something that is required. And so for me personally, I have a set of key performance indicators. And what I typically do is every Monday, I will go through, I have this set of graphs that I go through, and I can tell you every single billable person's break-even point in the company, how many hours they have to do a week before they pay, number one, pay for themselves, for their insurances and everything, and number two, where their profitability margin comes in. And so I can tell you when they take PTO. I can tell you when they do this, that, or the other. And I realize on an engineering company side that may be overkill, but it's unfortunately what I need to function well. And what I do is I realistically try to look at each contract we have, and they're independent. And you look at, well, how can we treat our customers better? How can we do things better? How can we treat the employees better? And a lot of that starts with the bottom line of billable, making sure that we've got billable, making sure that the contracts are solid. And I can tell you to the minute who's done what. And we have about 36 employees in the company. So
Well, it sounds like you're an engineer, even on the financial side of things.
Yeah, I am sorry.
No,
No,
honestly, that's not a bad thing because I've dealt with clients who have had fraud, in their businesses. And so being able to keep track of things, it may cost you a little more, at least in the short term, but it could end up saving you in the long term. So it's not a bad thing.
one of the biggest things it does is it allows me to make rapid decisions. When I see a trend line and I don't understand it, I can pull the program manager in and say, hey, what's happening here? Now, most of the time I have weekly meetings and people will tell me, hey, we've got some folks that are going to be sick, or hey, COVID, as a result, our squadron's doing this thing. And so we're going to go halftime, we're going to split. So you plan for those as best you can.
Right. So let's talk about the HR side
Okay.
of the business. Obviously, you've hired employees. What does that process look like? I'm sure it's a little unique given the fact that they have to have clearances.
Yeah, security clearance. I'll be honest, it's extremely difficult. Everybody out there tells you that they can bring, as you know, of course, you get a billion contractors that say, oh, we can fill the positions. Consistently, they can't. It costs tons of money for some of the software that you use to go out and try to find folks. I'll be honest, our HR team, my HR director, she's very well versed at looking at when people update their resumes. There are very interesting aspects in our industry and different practices, and I have a set of practices that I abide by. But we try to reach out to people who have updated their resumes or who are looking. We advertise locally on our website. We advertise on different paid for sites. But ultimately, to try to find the group of people, as I said earlier, in our industry, it's kind of a science in and of itself. So it's not like I can hire somebody right out of high school. It's not like I can hire somebody out of college and they have all the experiences needed. So the balancing act is trying to take what we have as a training structure and realistically hiring somebody for motivation and what we see capabilities to be, and then training them into the position. So it's a lot of investment, but it's worth it a lot. So hiring is about our number one problem. And I've talked to many business owners, and it's their number one problem too.
Yep, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So what challenges have you had in leading a team?
Communications. We're a communications solutions company, and we don't have the solutions for all the communications needed. Most of the time, especially on the bases, my team doesn't have access to their cell phones in the day. Every once in a while, the base will shut down access to their email ports. If I want to host, and I just hosted an all hands where I do a VTC and I brief the company on the state of the company, and we do surveys and all of those things. Trying to give them the opportunity to get into a closed location where they have privacy enough to listen to proprietary information in the company is a very difficult thing. Our Fort Gordon team does a great job, even though they're in Augusta, Georgia. We do weekly tags and stand-ups and all of those things, trying to make sure that we have constant communication flow. But number one problem is communications, and it's trying to make sure that just because it's in my head doesn't mean that everybody knows it. How do we get it out to them? So that's my number one issue.
And do you know your personality type and kind of how that makes you lead people and what has been difficult?
I do. I'm fairly type A. I didn't figure. I was going to ask you if you knew my personality. No, fairly type A. I will say that I like to be in control of the situation, and I try to pull myself back out of that control. I try to, even though I know I like to be in control of it, what I do at a personality level and management is I don't micromanage. If I put you in charge of it, you're in charge of it. If you need my help, I'll help you a little bit. But if you want a lot of my help, I'm going to move you out of the way. And so I make rapid decisions. I sometimes have a rapid recovery process too because of those decisions, but I typically like to ask the team, can you provide the inputs? So I can be sympathetic, I think, but I'm an engineer. Yeah, but I know what needs to be done, and I try to have the team of people around me that help me.
Right.
They might calm down, back away, back off. I'm not that bad, I don't think.
Oh, well, we have some of your employees here.
Yeah, we can go ask them. Yeah, but I won't go with you. No, no.
I'm sure they love you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned partners. Do you own 100% of the business? And if not, are there challenges with regard to employee on, having all of you involved, or does somebody kind of take the lead on all of that?
So I do have business partners. I've got 3 business partners right now. And partnership is good and bad. The goodness is not one person there to screw up the stuff. Everybody makes mistakes equally, but you've got people to bounce stuff off of. The badness is with somebody like me, I like to move fast, and sometimes I consider them in my way, though they're not. I truthfully learned a long time ago that just because I have an idea doesn't mean make it good. And if I can't convince my business partners that my idea is good, it probably isn't. So I need to listen. And starting early on, I'll be honest, couldn't have survived this business without them. We went through some pretty trying times early on, and that kind of drew us closer together. We all have different personalities and different aspects of things. We're all equally eclectic, I believe. But the business partners that I have, they are entrepreneurs in other industries too. And so they're kind of hands off, except for one of them. He's a day-to-day worker in the company with us, does a great job, helps across the spectrum. We hold quarterly board meetings. I have responsibilities on the quarterly board meetings. So yes, there are times when things are not all hunky-dory.
Yeah.
But those are the best times, when you have somebody questioning the decisions that you're making, because that's what brings out the best in you if you're willing to listen. So I would argue that I wouldn't be here without any of them. And I'm very grateful for them, but there are times I wish they weren't here. That's only when I want my way. And the bottom line is that's never a good thing. So it really is good having business partners. And I'm grateful.
Kind of gives you those checks and balances that, we've all been there, where we've wanted to make a decision, for our business that we probably know isn't the best decision, but we just can't, force ourselves to get there. So,
and in those instances, I'll pick up the phone and I'll call them. Hey guys, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
They'll say, that's stupid. Don't ever do that. So anyway.
Well, good to have somebody to bounce.
It's phenomenal. I would not be successful without them. That I promise.
Well, we're going to turn it back over to Miss McKenzie. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. We're just going to wrap up, but
Okay.
And you are an exceptional storyteller. So I appreciate you giving us all this feedback, especially in this sort of nuanced, organization and roles can feel kind of, I always say when people talk about DoD, they just speak in like letters.
Mhm.
And so
Acronyms all the way around. You're right.
And so thank you for the everyday person to kind of give us some perspective on what you do and how you help all of us. And so what would you say to a business owner that you, advice? So I'm sure there's a million things you could tell them, right?
There are.
But maybe something that maybe is more personal to you, maybe something that kind of left a lingering impression when it came to maybe someone gave you advice that you took with you.
There are 2 questions that I always like to ask business owners. I've had an opportunity to help about 23 businesses start over the years in some fashion. And there are 2 questions I ask. What do you want? And what are you willing to do for it? And that means a lot. But you don't even realize when you're starting a business what you're willing to do, what you have to do to make it work. It isn't a 8-hour a day, 40-hour a week job. But I'll say this: ask questions often, Ask them when you don't want to. Listen when you don't want to. And don't be afraid to reach out for help. And there are resources. You know, I've learned so much over the years, but most of it is I should listen more than I speak. I'm not always good at it, but there are a lot of people that have a lot of wisdom. And a lot of times executives or entrepreneurs who are really type A, they don't want to listen. They know everything. Just listen. Listen as best you can.
That's huge. Listening. I'm also a big believer in not always looking for answers, but asking proper questions. You know, sometimes it's like for trying to find that answer when really we're just maybe asking the wrong question. And so I encourage business owners to start thinking about questions instead of answers to get them thinking. So,
that is awesome. We do like to do employee surveys, and we do them anonymous. And, you know, sometimes the employees will come back and say, I'm not exactly sure what you were asking here.
Mhm.
And so I can't imagine in your job, you ask the right question to get back from me what you want. So
right. And so as we end today, is there a story that happened that just made you realize, like, I really love what I do? Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Again, I'm sure there's many.
You know, there are. Is there any one story? You know, I think everything from 9/11, I had the fortunate opportunity when that happened to troubleshoot Air Force One, the communications on Air Force One, 3 hours before a lot of the missile strikes in Iraqi freedom. I had the opportunity to troubleshoot the communication circuits that weren't working properly. I think it's been a combination of over the years of, there was a moment in the Red Sea at periscope depth where I needed something and I didn't have anybody to help me. And I swore if I ever had the opportunity to help on the other side, I would. And I can't specifically say what that was, but that has always stuck with me. And as a byproduct, I'm extremely passionate about the communications piece. And I don't even think I knew, even up to start in the company, 100%. And I think my vision's morphed over time. We started realistically in protected communications. And then we morphed into electromagnetics and communications. And I say that because, you know, I've had this really cool opportunity to work with NASA. I designed the communication system with my team. I came up with the concept and they really design it. I don't do anything. They're the ones that do the work. But to drill a hole in Jupiter's moon, Europa. So that's a 2032 mission date. We're working with NASA on that. And it's kind of cool. But I just happen to be in a conversation there. And I look across the spectrum and I say, I think because I have such a hard time sometimes communicating my intent, that communications is the passion piece of that. And I realize so many times the breakdown in communications is just because of our lack of understanding or ability to convey the information. And I think I got a billion stories, so I don't know that there's any one in particular, but I think that buildup of things in general have been the things that have driven me and given me the passion and seeing people be successful. You know, aside from the good Lord given me this opportunity, the only reason that I have any success at all is because of the people I surround myself with, not because of me. And so those are the things that are key and critical for me.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your perspective, for your integrity, your character, for what you do for the state, for the world, for space.
Thanks, Mackenzie. It sounds overwhelming when you say it that way. I'm just a guy doing a job.
I know. And your team, we appreciate it. So, and thank you for joining us at Small Biz Real Talk. And we're so grateful for ABC Bank sponsoring this. You can join us next month. We'll be at Mountain Standard Goods downtown. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.